All right, so the Hangout is live. My name is Jeff Orton. I am the founder of Writer's Bloc, and today we've got Jane Ross, the writer of Formaldehyde and the Seizure Viva la Novella prize winner. I think it's the first time I've ever said that like fully, properly without stumbling. But
congratulations.
Thank you. And so, yeah, just to give people some context as to what this is, if they're watching for the first time, Bloc Club is this kind of loose association of book clubs around the place. Some of them meet on in the flesh, and some of them meet online through Facebook. So we've got two book clubs. We talk about cult classic books, as well as a series of books we call Bright Young Things, so people that are emerging writers, which is where we think Formaldehyde fits. So, and the way I'm going to structure the chat is kind of a bit more like a conversation, and we'll get to know a bit about Jane process and all about where the story came from, rather than the traditional kind of bio, intro, that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a bit more informal, and then towards the end we'll bring some questions from people on Twitter if they want to use hashtag Bloc Club, BLOCCUCLUB, or you can actually ask questions through YouTube, but you've got to kind of have a Google Plus account. So, but anyway, thanks so much for rescheduling, Jane.
Yeah, no worries.
We planned to have a chat last Tuesday, but I was actually away on school holidays, and I was planning to chat to you from Sri Lanka. But I had all kinds of issues, like the actual charger exploded, and ensured, like when you put like a plug inside a plug inside a plug to charge it, and like the voltage must have been incorrect. And I'm really glad my computer wasn't stuffed, but yeah, I just wasn't comfortable about lasting the full
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it would have been really nice and idyllic, with the beach in the background, and the cocktail in my hand. But what can you do?
It's still kind of tropical, right, in Sydney?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's 30-something degrees. But yeah, we had a few interesting experiences in Sri Lanka actually. That we were staying in this place. Have you heard of there's an architect called Jeffrey Bauer? He's a Sri Lankan architect, and his whole idea is that the outside inside kind of thing. So you can see the ocean from the window, all that kind of stuff. But we actually had a totally outside inside experience on the last night there. I thought I heard this like kind of slight slap, and I thought, oh, that's weird, and it, like something's just like fallen from the roof, and I thought it was like a piece of rubber from the air conditioner or something, but it was actually this like black tree snake. It would have been about like a meter long, and but it was dead still, so I wasn't sure if it was a piece of rubber or a snake.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, so the reason why I'm telling you all these kind of travel stories is you've had some experience as a travel writer and working with The Lonely Planet. I mean, have you had any horror stories with traveling around in hotels and hostels and trains and all that kind of stuff?
Well, no terrible snake stories. I did get bitten by a bunch of wasps in the jungle in Cambodia. That was pretty gross. I think the worst thing was when a friend of my brother's in Cambodia, a Cambodian guy, wanted me to go meet his family. So I went for a ride with him on the back of his motorbike for like about a day it took to this little village out in the paddies somewhere. And we got there, and his dad, this lovely old man, showed me his favorite possession, an alarm clock. And then to celebrate, asked me to share some of his barbecued rat with him that he was eating. And I couldn't say no to him. And it was not good. It did not taste like chicken. It tasted like rat.
Did it look like rat?
It looked like rat. It was a rat with the bones in and everything, with a stick stuck through it, done over barbecue. And
you can't say no, can you?
You can't say no. He was offering to share his barbecued rat with me.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience when I was traveling in the Philippines. I was with a friend, and he took us to his family's family's home, and I was a vegetarian at the time, but they butchered one one of their chickens as like this feast, and I couldn't say, oh sorry, I can't eat it. It was kind of the beginning of the end of my vegetarianism.
Yeah, yeah, it's a slippery slope, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. So, did you write for Lonely Planet?
A little bit. No, not Cambodia. Most of the time I was at Lonely Planet, I was working on their website and running their travel bulletin board, the Thorn Tree, which, you know, brought travelers together from all over the place. But I did write Prague for them for the Czech and Slovak guide, and also wrote some of the Australia guide, part of northern New South Wales, which was a great experience. That was fun.
Oh, wow. So actually, it's an interesting segue. Our new content director, Liam, is in Prague at the moment doing something with the City of Literature, which is pretty cool.
I know. I applied for the same thing and he got it.
Oh, really? So you can apply? I have no idea.
You can, but only if you're from Melbourne. It's a City of Literature, Twin Cities type thing.
Yeah, right. So do you apply for many kind of residencies and grants and that kind of thing? Was that?
Not heaps, but weirdly, coincidentally, I also applied for one in Sri Lanka that I didn't get. But yeah, I've been working on a manuscript for a couple of years now, and for a while there I thought all I needed was some time, so I was applying for some residencies, but now I've realized I need skills more than time. So, you know, I'm making time in my day.
Right. So what do you, when you say you need skills, what are you looking to gain? I mean, I did read an interview. You said that you felt like you feel inexperienced at some points. I mean, what are the skills?
I kind of feel like I have never trained as a writer. I did train as a journalist. That was a very long time ago, but I've done no creative writing courses either at uni or even really many short courses, anything like that. And I sort of haven't come up through the usual route of getting short stories published in journals and that sort of thing. So I feel like there's kind of a big chunk of my education missing. I've been winging it this whole time, and I wouldn't mind learning a bit more of the craft of writing, particularly short stories, which I'm terrible at. So, yeah.
Have you found that process a bit daunting, that now that you've published a few books, you know, a couple of books, that if you were to submit to a journal, your name would be attached to it? Like, is there a loss of anonymity in that sense, or is it?
No, not really. I know I'm still pretty anonymous. You know, it's not like I'm a best-selling author or anything. I mean, there's heaps of people, even many people in the like literary scene who've never heard of me and couldn't care less about me. So yeah, no, It's not really a big deal.
Yeah, right. So have you started writing? Have you started submitting to journals? And
yeah, I have. I've submitted to a few journals. I've had quite a few rejections. I quite like rejections. They're fun.
Yeah.
But I've got a story that's going to be in Tincture at the end of the year. I think that's public now. It was just on Twitter. So I guess it's cool to talk about that.
Yeah, Danielle just mentioned it. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. So that's good. Yeah.
So do you read a lot of journals? Is that something that, I mean, I know you're a mad reader. The journal's a big part of that?
Not a big part, but definitely a part. I subscribe to 3 Australian journals and 2 from the US. So yeah, I sort of always have a pile of them sitting there looking at me, making me feel bad about how I'm not reading them. I'm reading some book instead. But yeah, I get through them.
Well, you know, you've only got so much time. I mean, like when I was again in Sri Lanka, I had almost the full day just to read, and you still managed to find time to do other things.
That'd be so good. I'd love to have a full day to read.
Well, yeah, I would. You'd mentioned time before and how you fit that in. I mean, what's one of the things that you have to do around your day job to find time for it?
Well, lately I'm married to a baker, so he goes to bed really early and gets up and goes to work at 2 in the morning. And he's been doing that for about a year. And people keep saying to me, oh, that must be really good. You have lots of free time to write. And I'd always say, nah. And then like about 3 weeks ago, it occurred to me that like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. I could use some of that time to write. So because I end up going to bed pretty early, I've been getting up at 5:30 and doing some writing before I go to work. And it's easy. Right. So yeah, that's been great. It's really good.
Yeah, I do the same actually. I find it far easier without the mess of the day clogging your brain in the evening.
Yeah, exactly. And you say to yourself, oh yeah, I'll do it when I get home from work, and then something else happens, something else happens. If you do it first thing, nothing can get in the way. It's great.
Yeah, it's kind of liberating. I mean, even if you've only written a small amount, at least you've started the day, on the right track. I mean, how much do you manage to get done at 5:30 in the morning?
I've been trying to write about 500 words a day, and it's been working pretty well so far. So yeah, I give myself about an hour, and then I get up and start getting ready for work.
Yeah, right. And what are you working on?
So it's something I wrote pretty much a novel length manuscript, about 80,000 words, I guess, historical fiction about my great-great-grandfather who was in a shipwreck and was stuck on the wreck of this ship for 8 days just off the shore of South Australia, and had no food, no water, survived that, went on to have a family, and that's why I exist. So I felt this urge to write a story about him, and I wrote it, and then I put it away and I read it. It was really boring. So I've sort of chucked that away, and I'm trying not to look at it and to approach the idea a different way and start from scratch again. So it's now a sci-fi historical fiction. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, right. And so why do you think that the stories, why do you think it was so boring? What was it?
I think it's partly, like I was saying before, that there's kind of a skill set that I lack.
Right.
And part of that is I'm terrible at describing things. Things that I write tend to happen in front of fairly cardboard backdrops. People walk around and talk and stuff, but I'm not very good at explaining what's going on behind them. So I wasn't very good at creating that sort of involving the reader in that time period, I guess. And writing in that sort of old-fashioned language, it just sounded dumb. Everything I wrote sounded dumb. So yeah, and I think I just wasn't as excited about it as I might be about something that's a little more speculative and weird. That just gets me more interested. So I'm trying that.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, you say you struggle with describing or filling out kind of a scene. One of the questions we had from one of our Bloc Club members was referencing, how subtle the future is that you kind of paint in formaldehyde. I mean, there's not like there's flying cars or anything like that. It's it's in the not too distant future. And the question that they've asked is, like, when you wrote the book, I know you wrote it in 2000. Were you writing 2022 from the year 2000, or is that something that you kind of moved the goalposts when it was submitted for this prize?
I did write 2022 from the year 2000, and it was obviously a lot further in the future then. But I still wrote it as pretty similar to the present day in 2000. When I went back to the manuscript last year to have a look at it and see whether it would work as a novella for this competition, those bits were hilarious. People were using payphones all the time in 2022. I had no idea of the internet. I had no idea of mobile phones. These are all things that existed in 2000, and I was using them, but they were still so sort of new to me and peripheral to my life, I think, that I just sort of forgot about them when I started writing. My mind was still, 5 years earlier or something. So yeah, I had to take out all the payphones and checkbooks and things like that.
Yeah, it is amazing how quickly certain technologies disappear, and even only going like 7 years in the future, some of those technologies will be obsolete.
Oh yeah, I'll have messed it up completely. Like buses, maybe there'll be no buses. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the things that stood out to me as well. It's like, oh great, buses, people are still commuting, 7 years. I mean, that's a big story on the news in Sydney today about people getting around the city, and they're trying to pedestrianise it. It's kind of a regression in a way to modernisation, which is really interesting.
Yes.
But when I was kind of preparing for this, I was also on the flight home. They had all the Back to the Future films, like 1, 2, and 3, and I kind of watched them in succession, and it reminded me that Back to the Future 2, it's supposed to happen in 2015. So the whole Jaws 13 and the Nikes that lace up and flying skateboards and stuff, high cover boards. what do you think, Paul, you know, and the rest of Formaldehyde, like, what are they going to be up to in 2022? Are you going to read it again then and cringe?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to read it and check it against what things are actually like in 2022. I don't reckon they're going to be that different. I mean, you know, it is only 7 years. As you say, there might be something surprising, but yeah, I'll be shocked if I've really messed it up.
Yeah, I mean, I did a bit of reading as well about your previous book, and also that you've got something that's coming out that you've co-written with.
Is out.
Oh, it is out.
Came out pretty much simultaneously with Formaldehyde.
Oh, fantastic! I was really fascinated. Do you mind talking about it a little bit rather than me trying to explain?
Yeah, sure. So I wrote a book with a guy called James Whitmore, who used to be my deputy editor when I worked at The Conversation. The Conversation's a website that does news and opinion written by academics. So we were the environment editors there. I don't work there anymore, he still does, but we've been working on this project together called The Handbook, Surviving and Living with Climate Change. And it's like a personal adaptation guide for climate change. So our principle was that, you know, we've got a certain amount of climate change locked in, at least 2 degrees of warming, probably more. That means more extreme weather. And our feeling was, you know, the Australian government's not doing much to protect us from, you know, more bushfires, more floods, more heat waves. So what can you do to make sure that you live through this stuff? How can you build a stronger community? How can you adapt your life so you don't die, essentially? That's our book. It's fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've spoken to you about this before on Twitter or you've picked it up, but I'm a geography teacher, and one of the things that we talk about in Year 8 is climate change. And the school I actually work at, we decided to, well, I didn't decide, the school decided to stop teaching that particular part of the topic and then focus on access to fresh water, so that there's elective topics. And the reason why they decided to do it was because of engagement of the students, and that, like, it wasn't necessarily the teaching or the resources. One thing I find that's really quite difficult in talking about things like climate change and global issues is what can the individual do? I mean, that's really hard. I mean, especially when you think about something so large and well, global as that. I mean, it's kind of hard. I mean, how did you go about it with the book?
Because sorry, because the book is not about stopping climate change. That is sort of a peripheral effect. Some of it results in reducing your emissions as well. The book is about essentially surviving disasters. So, so it is very personal. A lot of it's very personal stuff. It's about how to make a bushfire plan. It's about, you know, if you in an area where you're worried you'll be cut off, sometimes what sorts of foods should you have stockpiled in your pantry? You know, how do you collect water? How do you know how to make your own fuel if you want to get around? Can you convert your car to electric? Those kinds of things. So it is a very personal guide. It's about having a look at what sorts of risks you face specifically and what steps you can take to change your life to cope with those risks. But yeah, I see what you mean about, especially Year 8 students. And, you know, one of the things we might say to people who are like, well, what can I do about stopping climate change, or at least reducing climate change, is a lot of it's to do with your politicians and who you vote for and who you lobby. But if you're in Year 8, you can't do that.
No, exactly. And I guess just from a personal standpoint, the challenge is then is kind of taking something so catastrophic and potentially harmful, you know, to large amounts of people, is then how do you then take down to the individual level, but then also how do you then make it something as in positive change can be made at that level? So that sounds really fascinating as a practical guide for people. I mean, it was interesting. I was just watching the news, and the Victorian Premier was on talking about a fire in central Victoria today, and he was saying that the Victorian bushfire season has started.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yay.
Which blows my mind in early October.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to go too much into the book, but like what kind of things can someone do to prepare themselves?
Well, I guess the most important things are to look at what sorts of risks you're most likely to face where you are, and to decide whether those are things that you can deal with and prepare for, or whether they're too full on for you and you need to move somewhere else. Yeah. And so assessing those, making a plan for whatever it is, practicing that plan with your family or your housemates, your community, wherever you live, making sure you know what to do, because once a disaster strikes, it's really hard to think clearly, obviously. Yeah. But the other main thing we talk quite a lot about is how important it is to build links in your community. Online is great, but you also need to know people around you, because those are the people who will help you when you have problems. They're the people you need to help, and they're the people who will help you after a disaster as well. So yeah, get to know your neighbours and try to do stuff together. If you're going to have communal gardens together, those kinds of things, build some links between you. It's worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. It's something that we're going to have to think about, more and more, I think.
Yeah, and that pains me. I like to sit in the house and just be on the internet. I really hate talking to people in real life. So, if nothing else, it's a good reason to fight climate change, so I don't have to talk to the neighbours.
Well, you do reference being on the internet, and I mean, the first interaction I had with you was through Twitter. How important is technology in your writing and your practice? I mean, I also read that you were involved with NaNoWriMo in the year 2000.
Correct.
That's at the very start of it, right? Like, how do you get involved with these online communities?
That was in the second year, and that was in a real life community. Remember those? I was living in San Francisco at the time, and I was friends with Chris Beatty, the guy who started it up. So yeah, he just basically hassled me and said, "Hey, you should do this. Me and 2 other guys did this thing last year. You should join us and do it this year. We'll get hundreds of people." And then he got thousands, and then tens of thousands, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's how I ended up doing that thing. But yeah. Twitter is an awesome distraction from my writing practice, but I've also found it really, really good for making friends with other writers and getting support from other writers, because it's such a weird, lonely life, and you're so caught up in your head, and most writers are just, a little bit nuts. So it's good to have other people to talk to and reassure yourself about what you're doing. I love Twitter for that.
Oh, me too. And so for the benefit of people that are watching through YouTube, what's your Twitter handle?
Frippet, Frippet.
What's a frippet?
A frippet is a foolish young girl, right. And one of my friends used to call me that, like in the 90s sometime, and it's just kind of stuck with me.
So it's not a nickname. It's a real word.
It's a real word. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, like frippery. You know the word frippery.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated. I'm really interested in hearing about what San Francisco, the experience was like there, because I know you obviously your first book came out with NaNoWriMo, and Formaldehyde was also written in that time period. It sounds like a fertile kind of ground for you. I mean, what was it about San Francisco that was so fertile? Yeah.
I think a lot of things. It was the first time I'd lived overseas since I was a little kid. Anyway, first time I'd lived overseas as an adult. I was working for Lonely Planet and working in their office over there, and it was a very close-knit office. So lots of really strong relationships, friendships, other relationships, and spending a lot of time with a lot of really interesting, really creative, exciting people. And as someone who'd sort of grown up, I grew up in a lefty household where America was like the great Satan, basically. Right. Going to a place like that and realizing America's this great, really interesting, really lively place. And I was very struck too by how, in Australia, we'd have much more of a tradition of, there's no point trying that, that'll never work. Right. Why would you bother? The people that I met had much more of an attitude of, well, let's just give it a go and see what happens. And it's how you end up with something like NaNoWriMo, I guess, where you have a harebrained scheme and you just push it and see what happens. I think we're heaps better at that in Australia now than we were back then. But it was an exciting time, and there were heaps of young people in San Francisco who'd moved there for the first internet boom. So there was, lots of stuff going on. There was still a lot of artists there then. It was just, I think I was just a lot more alive and awake to what was going on around me, because I was in a completely new atmosphere, I suppose, where I was noticing everything and realizing everything that was going on around me, and everything was exciting. So I wrote a lot of it down.
So have you been back to San Francisco? Like, is it? I imagine that in the last 15 years it would have changed significantly.
Yeah, I've been back a few times. Most recently, I think it was 3 years ago. Most of my friends who were there have moved, either just to the East Bay or to other cities altogether. So I don't know very many people still in San Francisco, the city itself. But yeah, it's got even more expensive than it was when I was living there. It was already ridiculous. And sort of even more monocultural, I guess, where it's just, you know, a whole bunch of people working in tech who have loads of money and are all about the same age. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, yeah, fun in some ways, but just weird in other ways.
Yeah, I read this article last week about